Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at DriveThruRPG.com. With this video, I'll be reviewing the Encounters book, What Crooked Roots, designed by Cassi Mothwin for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review, and if you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. What Crooked Roots, subtitled 15 Folk Horror Roleplay Encounters to Unsettle and Terrify. So it's an encounters book that includes over a dozen different encounters. Now, I've reviewed a lot of encounter books here on the channel, and most of them are, they include battle maps, and they typically feature, monsters appearing on the road and some sort, and they're usually maybe half a page to a full page long, and typically have like a biome theme. This one does have a biome theme, if you could consider like creepy woods to be the theme. Folk horror, by the way, if you're not familiar, probably the best example, oh god, I can't remember the director's name, but he did Midsommar and The Witch. And then everybody always cites like The Wicker Man, but it's a lot of like specifically horror that typically takes place in very rural or even like pastoral area. It has to do with nature a lot of times, and typically involves like hags. It could be almost like a Grimm's fairy tale. That's probably like a sister subgenre of it, but it's not quite like fairy tale stuff, but it is definitely like, passed down horror and like, old evil. Typically has to do with trees and roots, and it's all very, when it's done well, it's very cool and creepy, and I think this is done well and is very cool and creepy. So specifically, these are encounters that are going to fit a creepy forest or woods. There's something bad going on there, or maybe that's, and it's usually like the villagers are all kind of in on it in some way. I guess the village in a way starts off like this folk horror, and then goes into some weird M. Night Shyamalan twist. For the most part, I really do like these encounters, and I think the designer has a very, very just academic approach almost to the entire subgenre. There's a really nice introduction that talks about, basically like the bullet points of, hey, what makes this genre the genre, in terms of it's got the horror in isolation, the fact that something happened in the past and will happen again, so a lot of rituals being involved. Typically takes place on the outskirts of civilization. There's not really any help to be found, or and the community is usually, kind of creepy in a way. So really cool to read all about this as like a pretense in case you're maybe not as familiar, about what you're about to get into of this subgenre of horror, which is pretty cool. There's also this running short story the designer wrote that's told in like 4 or 5 different kind of these mini one-page chapters, which I was completely enthralled with. And what a cool way of couching your tabletop RPG product in general, is just providing this story that the GM or DM is reading that actually integrates the encounters that you're designing. So in here, it's like you're being told you have to bring this offering of bread into the forest. And of course, you're told very little about it. Everybody's all hush hush. And then the first person protagonist has to then experience all of these very creepy, not all of them, but maybe a third of the total encounters as you go along. Of course, there's a very creepy twist at the end, which is absolutely delightful. So I thought that was a really cool way of doing it. And furthermore, the designer also is apparently a talented artist, which I've always said is completely unfair that people can both write and draw, and has provided all of this cool, creepy, original kind of line art style drawings, which is why you get these very awesome, like bespoke artwork that's specifically designed for all of these encounters, and that really helps enhance the product. So on the one hand, we don't have any kind of maps, which is always a disappointment for me as someone who primarily runs through a VTT, but we get a lot of really awesome artwork that helps draw in that immersion. I will say, in defense of the no maps, I'm never going to defend something about no maps, but there is, it completely eschews combat. So there's not, and a lot of encounter books that I review try to do like a balance of combat and exploration and role playing. And this one, even on the cover, it says, hey, this is a role playing focused encounter book, which is very true. In other words, it's a lot of think about horror. Horror is usually not action. Now, you can do action horror. That's also a subgenre. But in this case, it's, just really creepy stuff happening that maybe a lot of it's no explanation for, and you're not necessarily like battling monsters for the most part. So there are a few opportunities for combat. Probably the biggest example is one where there's, was it Corrupted Grove, I think? Yeah, mentally unsound awakened trees. Where you just come across a bunch of insane awakened trees who were corrupted by druids doing some evil shit. And there's no real explanation for, and really there's not a lot of explanation for a lot of these. These are supposed to be just creepy woods with some weird shit going on. And there's not, it is an encounter book. You're not getting like a full story or full context for a lot of these. Some of them are a little too short for their own good, and they start off interesting, but don't really, end up feeling very satisfying. This one, Born of Fire, is just a series of bonfires that kind of seem like something cool is going to happen, and it never really does. Ghostly Guide is a similar one. There's one with a hag stone that kind of whispers to you. I think, was it Small? No, not Small Burial. I'm looking at the artwork is the best way to do it. Missed Connections, where it kind of talks to you. You find this like hag stone in a bowl, and you end up being kind of a walkie-talkie to the spirit realm and talking to this ghost. And it starts off all creepy, but then it doesn't really go anywhere in the end. So a few of them, they kind of start interesting, but don't end up doing anything. But most of them I thought were very, very interesting, even if they don't involve combat. And I'm somebody who, likes, a nice dungeon crawl and combat encounters. So for me to say that, I think is kind of saying something. I'll go over some of my favorites here. If Mounds Could Speak, I forgot to write the page numbers, but this is a short enough book where I think we can find things. Where you come across a fork in the road and a large 20-foot tall mound is there with an offering bowl on the top with a little grape-sized hole in the bottom of the offering bowl. And if you put anything in the bowl, nothing really happens. But if you put something small enough, like a grape or something that can actually go down into the bowl, the mound feeds. It's a sarlacc pit is the big twist. And a lot of these have cool little twists in them. And it eats, whatever you offered it. And then it actually gives you kind of a blessing. So not all of them are just creepy bad things. That one's kind of a cool little transaction-y thing. And it's done very creepily, of course. Like these vines come up and twist around you, and they kind of painfully imprint a tattoo on your arm. Like that's really cool to describe it. But then the player gets the ability to cast like Entangle by using the tattoo or something. Now, if they try to rip the bowl off, they'll see the classic sarlacc pit of the serrated teeth and things going down. And the pit's not evil. It's not, and it can't speak, can't do anything. And obviously, if you reach your hand in it, that's probably a bad idea. You'll get your hand bitten off. But you can just feed it things. I thought that was a really cool idea. Rapture is the slasher one, which is the only one that's like this. Just seems like a classic slasher, but I love the intro of it, which is you come across this, village in the woods. There's nobody. It's very small houses. There's nobody there. There's a bunch of snakes on the floor, which it turns out that was the villagers got turned into snakes. And then you see this figure, slumped over, seated in a chair in the middle of this empty building, which is just creepy as hell. And then, of course, you notice that they're not a person. They're just made up of a bunch of, like, food. What does it say? Almond sugar and groats held together by mud. It's just kind of this creepy mud figure, which has been animated by one of the villagers. But, of course, it went wrong, and all the villagers got turned into snakes. And this creature is extremely clean and fastidious. And so that's why there's this laundry hanging everywhere that can kind of obscure the players, and it's all clean sheets. And then if you disturb this creature or make a mess anywhere, then it will hunt your ass down, which is very creepy. And it's immune to non-magical damage, and it sits within an anti-magic field, which would hopefully prevent people from just immediately blowing it up. Because the hard thing about horror in D&D is it requires a level of buy-in from everybody. It kind of requires you to play at a lower level, which, by the way, I think I forgot to mention, this is supposed to be tier 1, which you almost assume a lot of horror that's not action horror is meant to be tier 1, because players get so strong in 5th edition, and it's kind of hard to make them afraid when they can just cast Fireball at, they see this creature over there, like, fuck that, I'm not doing it, I'm just going to cast Fireball and destroy it. So it's tricky to get around some of that. And I do appreciate the designer seems to know that and has kind of worked in a few contingency plans, like this one for the Groat Man, and then for a couple situations where they talk about, hey, if you have a druid in the party or a ranger in the party that would know little extra things, here's what happens, or this area is considered magical terrain, so that won't affect the ranger thing. You can kind of twist yourself into knots trying to make horror happen appropriately, and I think it just involves a certain level of buy-in from the players to kind of I don't know, not play like a min-max action hero, which a lot of D&D you can do. So just something to be aware of, I think. Vow of Silence is probably my favorite one. It's also the longest one by far. In fact, it's over 3 pages long for an encounter. This one, the best horror stuff has some creepy twists in it, right? It's the classic Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, whatever you want to cite as examples of creepy horror. M. Night Shyamalan to an extent too, for kind of mainstream, I guess. But I like those horror that has those twist moments, and if you can do that in the context of a tiny encounter, that's really interesting. This one, you meet a farmer who says, "Hey, there's these weird like culty tieflings who moved in, and they're doing weird shit, and they're messing up my crops and making crop circles, and go take care of them." And so you go to the tiefling group, and twist number 1 is that they're not a creepy bunch of tieflings. They've taken a vow of silence, so they can't speak, and they're more communing with nature. And they seem creepy to, just outsiders, I guess. In fact, there's a little play that this is kind of the Wicker Man one, but they're not, capturing people and putting them inside a giant Wicker Man. Instead, they're doing a ritual to summon this kind of smoky figure that's supposed to cleanse the land. And you could argue, well, that's pretty creepy and weird. And the other twist is that the farmer is actually a bearded devil who killed the farmers and has disguised himself as a farmer and is growing in his cornfields a bunch of cicadas that are going to hatch and like devour the countryside or something, which is a pretty big twist. And it's supposed to be kind of hard for the tieflings to convey that, because again, they've taken the vow of silence. They kind of show you this like tapestry they've drawn, which shows images of what's going to happen, which I really like. You're trying to piece together, what's going on. Because if you could just talk to them, it'd be, all kinds of spoiled, I think. So I think that was a smart move from the designer standpoint. But I like that it subverts the expectations, where it's the classic, oh, there's some weird crop people out there. We're hired by the nice farmer to go take care of it. Instead, it's like the crop people are actually nice, trying to heal the land and prevent this locust calamity from happening, and it's the farmer who's the evil person, or devil even. So that was really, really cool. And there's even contingencies to say, hey, if the party helps or if the party doesn't help, the ritual they have to actually take part in seems creepy. People are cutting their hands and putting them over the flame, and they're dancing around, and it seems all kind of, and this towering figure emerges, but it just cleanses the land and kills all the locusts. And then and it even mentions like, hey, you can have the devil show up and fight or something if you need some combat in there. But that's cool. That's a full-on side quest. So that was really interesting. And again, a lot of these you could drop in anywhere, just to enter as a cool little immersive encounter or something. But that one I thought was definitely the longest and most well detailed. And I tend to like those more than the ones that are really, really tiny, because the tiny ones often just feel kind of unsatisfying and too short. Like, they start interesting, but they don't really get to anything cool. Probably the best tiny ones are this one with the drum, where you summon up like a ghost that wants you to do something, and you do the thing, and then you get a bonus. Or the one with the fruit from the tree, this creepy tree that's got fruit on it, and if you eat it, it can be a D6 table of things that can happen, and then the fruit inside, it's like fleshy fruit that literally has like human teeth instead of seeds, which is pretty messed up. This one also is a cool 1-2 combination with another one where you walk through a forest and you start messing with these tags, and it turns into corpses that are swaying, and they all try to grab you, and if any of them draw blood, then the blood drips down. The corpses all say, like the zombie stat block, creepy shit, and then that grows into a fruit tree that then has that creepy fruit in it. So I think that's a cool idea, actually, to combine encounters together into creating kind of a more, especially if you're creating a lengthier excursion into a creepy forest, then that's a good way of creating like a sequel to the encounter. And there's a couple that are like that, where it's like, hey, you can have them be this happen periodically several times over the course of traveling, and then it's the encounter that keeps on giving. Small Burial is another one that I really enjoyed. That's the one with the animal mask in it. That's one. You come across, this is another one with a good 2-twist system. You come across a bunch of people in animal masks, and they're dancing around, which is, of course, very creepy and strange. And the first twist is that the mound that they're dancing around is a body that they killed. And then the second twist, which you may discover later, is that they're actually animals that have been turned into people. They're not sure how that happened, and they're all wearing these masks of their animals. So they all act very strange because they're really animals, even though they can speak. And they're trying to recreate, there's 4 of them, they're trying to recreate and add a 5th friend, and because again they're kind of messed up and don't really have maybe the same morality. They just killed somebody and made a crude mask and put it on them, and now they're dancing around trying to make them into a fifth friend. So that's all really messed up. And I appreciate that there's some optional things you can do here where you can decide, hey, maybe their magic did work but in a messed up way, and this thing emerges as like a flesh golem stat block that attacks everybody if you wanted to, again, inject some more combat in there. So that's a really cool idea, and it helps to create just some, again, subversion of expectations. It's creepy and has a lot of twists. And I think the best ones do all of that. They're not all fantastic encounters, but most of them are. And even the ones that aren't are still, I think, pretty immersive. And I felt like I was just drawn into the overall, creepiness that this encounter book was trying to create. And on top of that, you've got this amazing artwork and this cool short story that runs throughout that also drew me in very completely. All right, pros and cons for What Crooked Roots. Pros: 15 folk horror encounters for creepy forests and trails. If you are trying to create that kind of dark fae or just a messed up village, or you just want to have a couple forest encounters that are just strange and weird, but also kind of memorable, I think this has some really, really good ideas in there. In fact, that actually draws to an entirely second bullet point of pro that I listed, which is, like a good movie, the best encounters here are fully immersive and memorable. I'm just thinking about them a lot as I think about how I would present them, how my players would react to them, the whole, just, and most of them don't involve combat, which is, I think, extra hard difficulty as a designer, because it's easy to fall back on combat because that's what D&D is kind of built for. And to be able to create memorable encounters that are not at all including of combat, and again, some of them you can have that be kind of an optional or always fall back on it. I mean, there's one with like a hag that you just get a mission from a hag and there's no combat whatsoever. In fact, there's only one of these that includes a hag, which I was also impressed by, because you think folk horror, like hag is such a major, the idea of the evil, I guess, crone is such a major element of folk horror, and yet this one only relies on that for one encounter, and it's not even a combat encounter, which is pretty impressive. Pro: an evocative short story that weaves together several of the encounters. This was really a fun idea. I don't think I've seen an encounter book do this. Okay, it's only 5, I think. Yeah, there it is. So these kind of 5 little chapters, and it's just a fun read, and it really got me excited. Again, the full immersion of walking through this forest, experiencing creepy things, having that twist at the end. It's like a classic, Twilight Zone episode kind of a thing, but this one is just, but also it has the pacing of a horror movie where it's like increasing feeling of dread throughout instead of just a necessarily one sharp twist. And pro: I love the artwork. The original artwork on just about every single page really elevates this product, and and that's the advantage to having that talent, is that you can then back up all of your fun encounters and ideas with actual artwork that is exactly of what you're trying to describe. So that's a huge plus. I do have some complaints, some cons. One con is that I think most of these shorter encounters are just a little too short and unsatisfying. I really, my favorite one was the one that was really long. I don't expect them all to be that long, but some of them just felt like they were a little too inconsequential and didn't really matter too much. And I feel like and maybe even have the worst feeling of like an encounter that starts more interesting and your players are trying to figure out, like this Born of Fire one where they're finding all these increasing bonfires and they're like, okay, this is a whole mystery, there's a whole side quest here, and there's actually nothing really happening here. It's just supposed to be like a brief image of something that's supposed to make them unsettled. So I feel like that actually goes too far into thinking it's a bigger thing when it's really not. So I would avoid using those kind of encounters, for example. And then my other con, I gotta ding it for the lack of maps, even though it's got awesome art and you don't even really need maps for 90% of the encounters. But a big reason of why I use encounter books is so that I can drop some maps in there for my players for VTT purposes. But if any, I will say in defense, even though I'm putting it as a con, in defense of this product, this is the encounter book that least requires maps because there's just hardly any combat in all of them. Final verdict: with a firm grasp of the nature-infused subgenre of folk horror, What Crooked Roots is full of intriguingly creepy and wonderfully immersive encounters. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Genocider, David Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Brian, Corey, Coa1337, Big Nut, John, Scott, Gene, Eric, Tyler, Nathan, Camp, Crystal Light, Counselor, Big Shep, Andrew, Daryl, the Reldrin, Matt, and Captain Woody79, and Gold patrons RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Refus, Carolyn, William, and Jerry. Thank you all very much for your support.